All right, we are live. Hello and welcome to episode 36 of the Rockies Now podcast. We are a Colorado Rockies podcast. You can follow us on all of your favorite social media platforms at Rockies Now, Facebook, X, Instagram, and of course the Threads page. I'm your host, Steven, along with co host Tom with me today. Tom, what's going on?
Pretty nothing much. Just enjoying the game one of the World Series. It's 5-3 so far, and our old friend John Gray is on the mound. So and so far he's doing pretty well.
I kind of miss him, man. Like he was such a good pitcher for us. At times I know he had a few bumpy years, but overall he was a good pitcher. And I'll never forget that 2017 season where he was our ace, and unfortunately, had that quick exit in the wild card game against
Mm.
the Arizona Diamondbacks. But you know what? I'm excited for John Gray. I'm excited for the Rangers. I'm excited for the series. I think it's going to be a good one. And of course, we're going to be talking about this tonight. Um, it's pretty crazy of how the Diamondbacks are just they're sneaky good. Like, and you mentioned earlier in the text that they're pretty scrappy, and I 100% agree with you. And you're looking at a potential series that the D-backs could win here, and I just am like shocked because it's just like Ivaldi's had such a great postseason, and I think he's one win away from five postseason wins, which would
Mhm.
make I think MLB history, postseason history, which is crazy. And now the D-backs they just get on base, they're stealing bases. I mean, Marte got a stolen base tonight. Everyone got free tacos, so congratulations to everyone. I might go get my taco myself, but man, I mean these D-backs they don't quit.
No, they're it's when I say scrappy, typically that's from those young teams because and I mean when I for anybody who kind of wants to know, elaborate a little bit, they're scrappy. They just continue, as you point out, they just continue to fight, and that's what young teams have. They have guys who are young, hungry, and when you're on baseball's biggest stage, you typically are going to go all out because you want to leave everything you have on the field, and that's exactly what the Diamondbacks are doing at this point. Even though Zach Gallen got roughed up a little bit at the beginning of the game, but they're not quitting at all, and which is good to see. And hopefully, the Rockies can maybe turn into that same type of team someday. Because one thing's for sure, I love the fact that this year's stolen bases are up.
Mhm. Yeah, and, Zach Gallen, of course, the first inning, I was like, "Yeah, this is not gonna go well for the D-backs." They're
No.
down 2-0, and I mean, Evan Carter, man, he's such a he's gonna be a bright I mean, this guy was in Double A to start the season, and then now
Yep.
in the biggest stage of the World Series, and that's just baseball. That's fun baseball right there. That's the love of the game, right? I mean, a player that comes up to, Double A and just all of a sudden hits. I remember when Kyle Schwarber was coming up through the Cubs, and he started hitting, and he's one of the big reasons why the Cubs were successful in the postseason because he was injured all of 2016, and look what happened. He's now a superstar with the Phillies, and it's just like you got to love that about baseball. You like in the line of Moneyball. How can you not be romantic about baseball? It's a wonderful sport. And honestly, this is probably I'm being honest here. I think this is one of the greatest postseasons I've seen in a very long time. Not because we're seeing some great games. It's just you never know what's going to happen in the postseason because we could have said, oh, Astros versus Dodgers or Astros versus Braves, but we're seeing two teams that lost 110, 111 games 2 years ago, and now they're in the biggest stage, ready to win a World Series. The Rangers, they've never won a World Series. The Diamondbacks, they only have one World Series ring that came in 2001 when they beat the Yankees with that famous Luis Gonzalez base hit up the center. That was a wonderful World Series and one to remember for a lot of people, especially after what happened, a month or two prior. And so I think with the postseason that is now, it's awesome. I love it, and I think this is good for baseball, and I think the viewership. I think there's been some stats that have been coming out recently that the viewership this year in baseball has skyrocketed, which is good for the game. I think the pitch clock has done very well for the sport. I love the pitch clock. At first, I think a lot of us were like kind of hesitant on some of these rules, but now I think they're great for baseball.
No, definitely. I mean, to your point about sports is unpredictable. You can never predict who's going to win a series, who's going to get upset, who's going to win it all. That's whether it's the beginning or the mid of the season or the start of the playoffs. But yeah, and of course, every year we see great plays, we see some great performances. But I think to your point, this is a year where basically a lot of crazy things have happened because who in their right mind thought that the Phillies going back home for game 6 and 7 up 3-2 would lose two in a row and lose the series? I can't imagine anybody predicting that, and it's just been wild and crazy, and like I said, these are 2 teams who have had similar paths over the past couple years, going back to 2021, both lost 100 games. I mean, the Diamondbacks lost 110 games, and
Hmm.
people I remember thinking when the Rockies played them in 2017 and the Diamondbacks, they had 80 plus win seasons in 18 and 19. Then I thought, 2020 was 2020. And then in 2021, they lost 110. I remember thinking, oh my goodness, they've fallen off quite a bit. And then here they are 2 years later, back in the World Series for the first time in 22 years.
Chris Young has done an unbelievable job with that team because, he was a
Yes.
former Ranger and he stepped into that front office and, the previous front office was kind of unreliable for a lot of people and just like they never really did much. And there was promise there for sure, but it just never panned out. And then Chris Young came in, basically immediately gets Marcus Simeon and Corey Seager. Some people had questions. Some people thought, oh, it's just for the money grab and just all that. But no, he had a goal in mind. He had a vision in mind. And again, we'll talk about this in just a second. But as a GM, that's what if you want to get back to being a competitive team and a winning organization and a team that wants to win a World Series ring and go for all for it, that's what you do. You go out and you be serious about it. And whether it's rebuilding, which is kind of what the Rangers are, have done, and but also going out in free agency and being serious about it. And I think for some teams it's different because of money and all that. The Rangers, they have spent a lot of money with a lot of the players that they have now. And of course we'll talk about the Rockies in just a second, but there's some teams that like Arizona, they're a small market team.
Mhm.
They didn't really go out and get free agents. They made trades, but a large part of it has to do with the farm system. And I guess we'll, actually, you know what? Before we get into that, let's do our World Series predictions. Um,
Sure.
I think I'm gonna do. This is tough because at the start at the start of the game, I was like, yeah, the Rangers are probably gonna sweep the D-backs. There's no way that the Diamondbacks are gonna win this. Now it's just like right when I say that, like Pham gets a home run, I'm like, crap. But yeah, it's just man. I mean, I'm just gonna go Rangers in 7. I think the D-backs they're gonna be feisty all series long, and I wouldn't be surprised there might be a walk off or two, but I could see the D-backs winning it, but and they'll probably will. But you know what? I'm just gonna go Rangers in 7 because I want Texas to win. I'm rooting for Texas. As a Rockies fan, I really feel like I told somebody the other day when the D-backs won the National League pennant, I was happy for them, but I'm like, as a Rockies fan, this kind of hurts my soul to see because we're like second cousins to the D-backs, and it's like it's like that the Diamondbacks are kind of like that cousin that you just don't like, you don't talk to, and so I was like, no way. I'm not cheering for the D-backs, but I'm happy for them. They have a great fan base that they deserve, to have, to go to the World Series. But I'm going to go for the Rangers, not because, not only because, John Gray's on there, but, I think they deserve a World Series title after like 50 plus years of looking for one. And, they've gotten close so many times, especially, in the, 2010s when they were there in 2010 and 2011. They were one strike away, by the way, a couple times that year. And it's just like, man, if I was a Rangers fan, that would just be terrible. So I'm going to go with the Rangers in 7 here. I think with their pitching that they have, I think, however, it kind of concerns me because again, the D-backs, they're feisty, they're scrappy, they have a lot of bright young players that can not only hit, but they can steal bases. And that in some ways, I feel like stolen bases is just like very underrated because it's just like back in the day that used to be the big thing. Nowadays, not a lot of people steal bases. Where the D-backs, they're kind of playing old school here, and so I think it's going to be a very close series. And again, like we've been seeing this postseason, and I think you alluded to it a little bit, but we've been seeing a lot of road teams winning this postseason. And we saw in 2019, or yeah, it was 2019 or 2021, when it was 2019 World Series when the Nationals and the Astros played. The
Mhm.
Astros didn't win a single home game in the World Series, so we might see that happen. If that's the case, I think yeah, I think the D-backs will force a Game 7, and the Rangers will win it, and I believe that will be at in Arlington. So I'm gonna go Rangers in 7.
Oh yeah, I mean, to your comment about that, it is once I mean, again, who thought that both championship series would go to 7 games? I don't think anybody could have ever saw that coming. And like I said, as I've talked about the NLCS a bit ago, I'll comment about the ALCS. I saw once the Rangers forced the series to go to game 6 and 7 back in Houston, I thought, oh, they've got this. Because they looked, and then of course they put up a stat that I think it was in game 6. The Astros, including the regular season, the playoffs, they were 40 and 46 at home. the Astros losing record at home. I
Mm,
could not have seen that all year long. But it's really, I mean, as we talked earlier via text about what about this, it's just so hard for me to because I want to root for both these teams in a sense because I don't like seeing the same teams going back into like the being the top teams every year. I hate seeing the Dodgers, of course, in atop the division every single year. It gets irritating. Or if you go to college
mhm,
football, don't like seeing Alabama always in the top five. Don't like seeing Clemson always, etc. Those kinds of things. So
mhm.
it's refreshing to see these two teams who haven't made the playoffs in a while are back, and they made it all the way to baseball's biggest stage, pulling off some crazy upsets along the way. Um, but the fact of the matter is, I do point toward the Diamondbacks. They of course used to one of my favorite players of all time, Randy Johnson, had some of his best seasons with them.
Mm.
And like I said, I've commented in the last two rounds. I think that the Diamondbacks train stopped there, and I was dead wrong. But I think the Rangers are more talented overall. There's only three spots that I give the Diamondbacks the advantage, and that is catcher, first base, and the bullpen. Those are the only two spots. I mean, sorry, three spots. Excuse me. And then the Rangers, I just think they have that rotation. If it be again, Evaldi had a bit of a iffy start today at times. But if I think this pitching staff continues to hold it together, I think they will win. It's going to come down to who pitches the best series, and I think that's going to be the winner. So I'm going to pick. I think this series will not be finished in less than 5 games. It will not be finished in Arizona. I think this will come back to Texas in game 6 and 7. I think it's going to be the Rangers in 6. This is going to be a hard fought series because I think these teams, even though, like I said, Diamondbacks, I think, are only have the edge of three positions. I still think these teams are fairly evenly matched overall. So this could be a hard fought series, and I ultimately think the Rangers will win it at home in Arlington in that new ballpark that's only a couple years old in Arlington in 6 games.
The D-backs, last two guys in the bullpen, Kevin Ginkel and Paul Sewald, they have not given up a run this postseason. That's pretty darn good. They've been electric. And see, yeah, I agree. Like the D-backs bullpen, man. I mean, Ryan Thompson, he's been great.
Mhm.
I forget his name. Sal Frank, that's right. He's been
Yeah, it's a lefty.
decent he was also a guy that was in AAA this year that just came up and they're taking the step forward. And I mean, the Rangers bullpen as well has been somewhat good this postseason. And you're seeing some, we alluded to this a couple weeks ago. I think that, you know, the postseason is a whole different season. It's a whole different game, and it might switch, right? I mean, but again, you sometimes see some stuff carry over, but I mean, if you're looking at advantage here, I think for sure D-backs bullpen definitely over the Rangers bullpen, and the Rangers have used a lot of Jose Leclerc like a lot, especially in the ALCS. I
Yeah.
wasn't a huge fan of that because again, like we've seen it as Rockies fans, we've seen that before to where sometimes we see some of these pitchers they just look tired. Brent Suter got used a lot this year. I think that was one of the reasons why he kind of didn't do so well at the end of the season. Of course, the Rockies they didn't really have much to play for, but when you get used so much, you get tired. I think Leclerc, again, he's a solid, closer. We all know that, but again, we saw at the end of the series that yeah, he was able to get those outs, but he gave up, I believe, that home run to Altuve in Game 7, which didn't really help. It was the Chris Paul reference, if anyone knows that. But anyways, yeah, I think it's going to be a great series overall. So I think the Rangers. I'm with you. I think the Rangers overall. I think they just th- both teams are hungry. Again, it could go either way. I could easily see the D-backs winning it, but I think this is the year. It just feels like this might be the year that the Rangers win their first. But again, who knows? Maybe the D-backs are and the D-backs too. I mean, if the D-backs win the World Series, it'll probably be one of the greatest, teams to ever, shine. Like, I mean, they came in sixth seed in the National League and basically from just a couple years ago from worst to first, basically. And it would be one of the greatest runs in playoff, history for any team. And I think, Arizona, they could definitely do that. But I'm gonna go Rangers in 7 here. Um, so I think next the Rockies, as we head in the offseason, they have obviously we talked to Lewis from Blick Street Banner last week. That was an awesome podcast, by the way. Go check it out if you haven't already. Um, we talked about, the rebuilding process and what the Rockies might do this offseason and what they probably won't do. And and I guess we'll quickly allude to this before we really start, talking about this. But I think for any rebuilding team, where the Rockies are right now is kind of tough because you kind of feel like you're already set, and I feel like the Rockies team is already set in a ways for next year. If you look at the lineup, the Rockies, they don't need any outfielders in free agency. They don't need any infielders. They don't need any catchers. They don't really. What they need is starting pitching depth, and kind of like what they did last year. Last offseason, they got guys on minor league deals or 1 year deals. We're basically going to see that this year, but what we want to talk about is how can the Rockies kind of, follow after the D-backs and kind of look at the D-backs and perhaps even the Orioles and the Rangers and say, hey, how can we build a championship team? How can we go through this rebuild and become a competitive team quickly? And I think nowadays, because I feel like several years ago, it was extremely hard just to do that in like 3 or 4 years. Now like, if you're smart enough and you make the right moves, you can do it in under 2, sometimes under a year or 2, and that's what the D-backs did. I mean, last year, the Diamondbacks weren't really good. The Rangers, I think, lost over 90 games last year, if I'm correct. So, it's possible for a team to turn around a 90-loss season, at least that, or maybe even 100 to, going to the World Series. And I think for the Rockies, what do they have to do? And I think if you start out with general manager, like I was mentioning earlier with Chris Young, he had a plan when he came in. This is something he's never done before. He's never had experience. I mean, he's a player. He literally retired off the field and jumped right into the front office. And he is one of the best GMs, in baseball, easily by far. And he started going to work. And one thing I do like, and I kind of compare, I kind of see similarities between Bill Schmidt and Chris Young. And Bill Schmidt, yeah, like he had a couple bumpy starts to his reign as a GM with John Gray and Trevor Story. But for me, I was just thinking about this the other day. I kind of like, yeah, that was disappointing as a Rockies fan, but he literally, yeah, he's been in the front office for a while, but he was mainly a scouting director. He had no clue on how to be a GM because a GM has to basically oversee everything, like all the operations of the team, scouting, directing, that sort of thing. And for Bill Schmidt, the way he's done ever since then, I think he's done an incredible job because he's looking at kind of like what the Diamondbacks did and what the Orioles did. They did the draft. The focus is the draft and the young players, and that's what Bill Schmidt is doing. And you can already see that in work here. And I think Bill Schmidt has a plan, like I mentioned before. And I think if the Rockies want to do something like the D-backs and the Orioles are doing right now, and going to the postseason, after a year or two after losing 100 games, that's how you do it. You do well in the draft and you play some of the young kids, and I think that's what we're seeing already. And now we're just waiting really for the other young kids to come up and for the draft. Of course, the Rockies are going to have a very good draft pick next year. And as a matter of fact, the Rockies are tied with the Athletics and the Royals for the first overall pick in the lottery draft that will be happening in about 2 months. Actually, a little bit less than 2 months now. It will be early December, I believe. So, like, what do you think? Like, would you agree? Like, do you think the Rockies? Like, what do you think the Rockies can do to for them to kind of do what the D-backs and Orioles are doing right now? Because I feel like Bill Schmidt is kind of following that plan a little bit.
Well, I do remember, I can't remember what executive said this. I think a couple of different ones have said it in different ways. Former MLB executives, such as, for example, Dan O'Dowd, former Rockies GM and senior vice president. Um, when you are doing a rebuild, which both of these teams have done, both to different degrees. The Diamondbacks built more within and then supplemented with veteran additions. Whereas when, as you point out, when Chris Young was appointed to GM after the new ownership group let go of John Daniels, he came in with a plan in mind to use some of the core players, not just some of the young core players that he had on the roster and was nearing to come to the roster, and then he supplemented that with spending quite a bit of money. He spent in one off season, he added Simeon and Seager for about $500 million in total contract values. But they were calculated. They did that in one off season. They still lost 90 games with those two. And of course, we all knew that two players aren't going to make a baseball team from good to much better overall.
Mhm.
And so then last offseason, he made more calculated moves by adding a lot of the free agent pitching from DeGrom to Evaldi, and of course our old pal John Gray. Or actually, I think Gray was 2 years ago, excuse me, but still he added John Gray. And then at the deadline, he added Max Scherzer, and I think he added Aroldis Chapman. I believe he had, I can't remember who it was, one more bullpener. So Chris Young had a plan. I'm sure he had on his board who's here, who could be available. And then took the risk, and he basically pushed his chips in over time, little by little, and then this year he pushed it all in, and then it paid off. Whereas the Diamondbacks, they took a completely different route because former MLB GMs who have built successful teams have always said if you're going to do a rebuild where you're building from within, you have to pick the right prospects and you have to hit on a couple. You're not going to hit on all of them, but you got to hit on at least. Let's say you acquire 8 prospects to start a rebuild. If I would say 3 become everyday players and 1 becomes a bench player, and the rest, don't even make it to the major leagues, that's a pretty good thing because 50% mark, help make your team into the next contender. That's a pretty successful rebuild. And looking at the Diamondbacks here, just over in their top 20, I'm looking at their top 20, their top prospect list from 2021. Their of the top 5 they have, of their top 5 prospects that year, 3 of them are on the current team, which
Mhm.
is Alec Thomas, Geraldo Perdomo, excuse me, I gotta make sure I pronounce that right, and then Corbin Carroll. Interesting about Ginkel, he was their 29th ranked prospect that year. So he was somebody who was ranked there because before this season, I had personally had never heard of him. But anyway, the point is, yeah, and then over time, they did develop these players. Some of these guys developed fast and quick. Corbin Carroll and Alec Thomas and Perdomo were the examples. And they didn't add as big a splash of free agents, but they added a couple of little ones here and there. Like for example, I think the 2 biggest veteran additions they made were not big, flashy, expensive ones, but I love the addition of Evan Longoria coming in. That I think he was a great player in his Tampa Bay days. He spent a couple years. It was 5 years in San Francisco where he was a quality player that they were able to use as a veteran. Then this year he wasn't going to be the his Tampa Bay self, but he of course has been a veteran presence, kind of like how Charlie Blackmon and Chris Bryant were for the Rockies the past couple years, being that voice in the clubhouse, and he has benefited. And so it is kind of interesting. The 2 World Series appearances he's made in was in his rookie year and here this year, which could possibly be his last year, especially if they win it all. And the other big sign that I love that they made, it wasn't a signing, it was a trade. Paul Sewald has been lights out for them. I mean, that's one guy who you can count on to nail it down at the end of a game. So again, when I compare things to the Rockies, they are doing so far, I would say they are doing a very good job when it comes to building the next team from within. And they have, as we've commented before, they have the right guys, I think, to help build around the roster. The only question is who are the right guys, veteran additions to supplement and finish off that roster, and when do they make those moves to add the right guys to join the team? That's the question I think that needs to be answered.
Mhm. Yeah, and, another team like I like to mention is the Orioles. They don't have all rookies. They have, Anthony Santander, who's been there for a while. And and not only that, but like a lot of their pitchers are, free agency. Of course, they don't have to worry about Coors Field where the Rockies kind of do, and you kind of are forced to, um, you know, bring up pitchers from the minor leagues and draft them and develop them, and that's key too. And I think I want to say I'm not sure if it was on Drew Goodman podcast. I think it was on a different Rockies podcast, but Clint Hurdle. He was talking. I think he was on DNVR.
It was DMVR, I
Yeah,
believe.
it was on DNVR, and he was talking about how, the past 2 years, the Rockies have gone basically opposite to what they've been doing for the past, 31 years is going heavy on pitching because yeah, they've had some years where they draft some pitchers, but, a lot of it has to do with hitters and position players. And where this year, the past 2 years, they've had a primary focus of drafting pitchers. And I forget the number, but it was basically almost three-fourths. I want to say this is just a shot in the dark. I think it's like three-fourths of their picks over the last 2 years have been pitchers, which is if the Rockies want, and I agree with Clint Hurdle, if the Rockies want to get back into contention and turning this thing around, you have to start with pitching. You have to, And some people say, well, the Rockies they need offense. What about the offense? Because this year the offense wasn't so good. Well, it's almost natural for it to happen, especially for a lot of young players like Brenton Doyle, who I think is going to be fine offensively this year. Yeah, it didn't look good. He had basically under 200 for the entire season, but really for Brenton Doyle, it's his defense. Where you're going to have players on any team like there's, I'm not looking at the D-backs lineup right now, but I'm sure there's players that are basically 200 hitters, but they go out there and they do their job. And Brenton Doyle's job is to play defense, and he's going to win a Gold Glove and all that. But you know the Rockies, they have to start with pitching. And I think yeah, right now the Rockies really don't have a lot of that, or at least a lot of their starting pitchers are injured, and Marquez and Sindatello, who will be out at least until probably my guess August, until August of next year. And so uh, the Rockies have to do pitching. I think Clint Hurdle, not he kind of gave the plan. Basically, he said the plan for the Rockies is to do pitching, potentially next year. I mean, we'll see. We'll see. We really don't know what the draft class is going to look like, but I think what the Rockies are probably going to do, they're probably going to do pitching, and more pitching, which is great. Of course, they might occasionally get some hitters, but one thing I really do like is that you know, like the guys that they didn't draft, and I'm talking about pitchers, the players that they didn't draft as pitchers, like guys like Cole Carrig, they are solid players. Like some people thought, oh, well, those guys are going to be, bench players. Cole Carrig, I think I forget he was hitting like I think above 400 or 500 in single A. It was crazy. Or at least at the end of the season, he was tearing the cover off the ball, and they're nailing the hitters in the draft. Not only I believe they're somewhat nailing some of the pitchers. Some of them might be a shot in the dark, but I believe they got Dolander for a reason. They might have wanted, I think it was Louder. I think they Rhett Louder. I think they had their
Mhm.
eye on him, but Chase Dolander, according to Dan O'Dowd, former Rockies GM, he said that, according to him, he thought that Chase Dolander was the second best pitcher in the draft behind Paul Skeens, which is huge. And, yeah, like, Tom alluded to it, like some pitchers or some players, they just don't pan out well, especially in the first round, because you're kind of like, we've seen it all throughout baseball. Like, Billy Bean, of the Oakland Athletics, he was a highly prized prospect, and look at his MLB career. It wasn't successful at all. So it happens, unfortunately. It's a part of the game. But I think the Rockies, they have a plan. They know what they're doing. They know that they need to get pitching. And in order for the Rockies to turn the ship around is to draft, starting pitching. And that's huge because the offense, I feel like the Rockies already have the guys for offensively in the minor leagues, because their lineup eventually is going to get somewhat jammed because they have a lot of good infielders. They have a lot of good outfielders like Zach Veen and Yanquiel Fernandez. And so when those guys come up, you're going to have to find positions for those guys. And of course, by the time Bean and Fernandez come up, I believe Blackman will already be retired. I don't think he's going to get traded. But I think you have to find position for that, and that's when it comes to with trades, and that's one of the topics that have come up recently. In that it's possible that we actually might see a trade this offseason, and that trade piece might be Brendan Rodgers, because you know uh, the Rockies have a guy named Adele Amador. I think you guys, for those who have listened, have probably heard his name before, especially on this podcast. We haven't spoken much about him, but he is the number one Rockies prospect right now. And I think he's going to be a very good player. And I think a lot of people are excited about him playing next to Tovar in the infield. And so the question is, okay, what about Rogers? Well, I think this year, you know, is going to be basically looking at Rogers and saying, hey, are you the guy or not? And if Rogers is still being inconsistent with his health, and if he's not hitting well, um, I think the Rockies will let him go once Amador is ready, and they'll probably trade him. And hey, if you trade Rogers, you can get some solid pitching out of him, because I remember last offseason the Rockies were thinking about that. But the problem is they didn't really have an infielder that was ready. Of course, the Rockies have a couple of guys in AAA like Coco Montez, but Coco Montez, I think will probably be like a Harold Castro type of guy. He'll play some games, but he'll be a bench player. The Rockies, basically their future second baseman, I think, is Adele Amador. And so yeah, like right now the Rockies, I think the plan is for them for them to kind of get back into that window and kind of turning this thing around, is to kind of, do what Tom said, is kind of, evaluate where you're at right now with some of the prospects. And when you're ready to make trades, make those trades for starting pitching or for veteran help. And I think for the Rockies, I think their lineup is looking pretty solid. I think in the next couple of years, I think it's mainly. I think if they make trades, it's probably for going to be for starting pitching, or at least if there's a hole in the, or if they feel like they want to improve in the late part of the bullpen, they can do that. And I think I feel pretty confident that the Rockies, they kind of know it because Clint Hurdle, and he actually, I think he mentioned this on the DNVR podcast too, is that he wouldn't have gone back to the Rockies and worked with them again if he didn't feel like the Rockies didn't have a plan. He said there would be no way I'd be here. I wouldn't be working for the Rockies again if I didn't feel like this wasn't going to work. And for him to say that gets me excited. Now will it work? We hope. But I think with Clint Hurdle, for him to come back to the organization and say, "Hey, let's do this. Let's fix this. Let's turn this thing around. And let's get back to winning some baseball games." And I think that's what the Rockies should do, and I think that they're doing them right now.
Yeah, and just to go along with talking about Brendan Rodgers, I think they're gonna get some phone calls about him, maybe some other infielders who can play that position. Because if you look, and the reason I say that because if you look at the free agent market this offseason for middle infielders, second and shortstop, it's not very good. There's really not much available. I mean,
Hmm.
call me crazy for saying this. I think the best free agent shortstop looking at the list for this offseason is a 36-year-old Elvis Andrews. That's saying a lot right there. The only other guy who I would even think about considering looking at is Ahmed Rosario, who is not an ideal guy who walks and gets on base a lot. He can hit at times for a decent average. He's a good athlete. He can play center field, but outside of them, there's really not much available. You have guys like Adam Frazier, I think, who's still going to be available, but he's not a terrific defender. And his Pittsburgh Pirate days, where he hit 326 in the first half of this before the All-Star break, I think are over for him. So I think at this point he is a bench player. And again, it would be sad that they're going to have to make that difficult decision. I think ultimately, but it's up to Brendan. Can his body not betray him and allow him to stay on the field and play 120 plus games in a season? That's always and that happens to a lot of top young players. They just can't stay on the field. I mean, the White Sox, I have a couple of examples on that. So we'll see how that shakes out. But to your point, I think they're going to make Bill Schmidt. I think he's going to make one or two trades this offseason, if maybe not big splash trades, but he's going to try and upgrade the roster via the trade market if the right position that of need is available. But yeah, they're gonna if they can if they can all, barring good health, like I've said before, if they can take those steps forward and improve their record possibly into the low 80s, which is maybe into the 70 losses. That's kind of a stretch, I know, but that would be a big step forward if they could do that. And
Hmm.
again, it's going to be interesting to see who's available, especially as the winter meetings get closer, because that's typically when trades really start to heat up. Um, and of course, we'll talk about this, but I think the most interesting domino we're going to have to wait and see who that falls is Shohei Ohtani. Where is he going to go? But I think the Rockies will have if you're looking at the free agent pitchers for this offseason, starting pitchers specifically, I think the Rockies have a chance to maybe try and persuade a few of them. And again, it's not going to be Shohei Ohtani. It's not going to be Clayton Kershaw. It's not going to be your some of these other guys who have player options or mutual options with other teams. But there's a couple of guys who they may be able to persuade and have serious talks with about adding them to the roster. Again, we'll talk about that in a later podcast, but there could be a chance that they may part ways with a couple of guys in trades this offseason.
I want to say Noah Syndergaard is a free agent. I think I know. Or no,
I
yeah, I think
oh,
he is.
he got DFA'd, I believe, by the
Oh, he
Cleveland.
did. Okay,
Yeah,
but I
I
know.
think
Yeah.
let me go ahead and keep talking. Let me check. I think because I know he was at LA, they traded him to Cleveland for Ahmed Rosario, actually,
Hmm.
surprisingly. I think he got DFA'd. Let me just check real
I think you
fast.
might be right. But yeah, like Aaron Nola, he's going to be a free agent, and I think he's going to go back to Philadelphia. But it would be interesting to see. It'd be fun to see if he went to somewhere. It'd be kind of fun if he went to Colorado, but that's probably not going to happen. But the March, I agree. Like the Rocky, like because really, like you said, the big domino is going to be Otani, and then once that happens, it's just going to crash. And really, the definition of this offseason for a lot of teams is going to be Shohei Ohtani. What's going to happen to
Mhm.
him? Because it's like last year, the big domino effect was Aaron Judge, where he's going to sign, and and of course with Arson Judge, and man, when that happened, I actually believed that first because I'm like, oh no, the Rockies are gonna have to face Aaron Judge, and then all of a sudden I just we see that he goes back to New York. I'm like, thank goodness. But the big domino last year was Aaron Judge because I mean he's up there in the MVP almost right next to Otani, and really a lot of dominoes fell. But like the Rockies, they didn't really do much. They made a few. Well, actually, I think most of their trades was actually before before 2023 came in. I think they traded Connor Joe. They traded Sam Hilliard. So yeah, I could see I could see the Rockies making some trades, but maybe not as much because the Rockies really don't have a lot of players that are oh, well, we don't have a spot for it. Well, because a lot of the guys that they are, they've already cut like Harold Castro, he's already
Mhm.
off the team, and same thing with Austin Wins. And we talked to Lewis about that last week about should the Rockies bring him back. I think they should just for depth because Drew Romo is not ready, and yeah, it would be cool. And I know that there's a couple guys in AAA that I think Braxton Fulford might be one of those guys too, but the Rockies, they really don't have Romo ready because at the end of the season, he literally got called up within a couple weeks of the
Mhm.
season ending. So you can't really call him up unless if he just all of a sudden like goes out and hits crazy in spring training. And I don't think he's doing very well in the Arizona Fall League right now. But they need just for the veteran experience and for in the defense for Austin Wins is pretty good. Like he had a pretty good defense. He was able to, take care of some of those pitchers. And I think he could come back. I think, Austin because there's going to be a lot of teams out there that are like not available or they already have a backup catcher. And the Rockies are one of those teams that they don't really have a lot of, solid backups. And I think they'll need Austin Wins. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if they bring him back. And so, yeah, like I feel like yeah, like I was talking to, I feel like if the Rockies they do make some moves, I think it's probably going to be free agent, acquisitions for like 1 year deals or like basically minor league signings, kind of like
Yeah.
what they did with Matt Cook and Matt City, who's off the team, I believe now, who they just cut. And then, and I want to talk about Ryan Rolston quickly because I feel bad for like I know Purple Woe was talking about this. I feel bad for the dude because he's been injured so many times, and this guy was drafted in the first round, I believe, and a lot of people, were excited about him coming up and potentially being part of the rotation. It's just that the injury bug has got to him every single season, and he got re-injured again, you know, at the end of the season, and he's probably not going to pitch next year. It's just, I feel like the Rockies they need to let him go and just, because like you said, like some first round picks, they just don't. And it's not all every single time. Like first round pick, it can be second round, third round picks. It happens, and it's kind of funny to see. Sean Bouchard. I think he was like a 16th round pick or 13. It was
Mhm.
something like that. And you get some of those players. David Dahl, I think, was I want to say he was like a late round pick. I'm not 100% sure on that, but you get some of those players that come up through the 15th, 16th, 17th round, and they just do remarkably well. And unfortunately, that's just part of the game. But I think that's what the Rockies are probably going to be doing. Somebody was mentioning, could the Rockies go out and get Jock Peterson or bring back CJ Corona, Randall Grichuk? I'm sure the Rockies would be interested and be more than happy to bring them here. It's just that they don't really have a lot of room for that. The only spot would be for second base if they trade Rogers.
Yeah, there's in certain they have a lot of position players that are base spots that are basically set at this point. The only thing they would be look I if you see an opportunity to upgrade a position you feel that you need to fill, examples second base and possibly maybe right field if you want to upgrade that. But I think Zach Veen could be the future for that spot. That's where you make the change. But I mean, again, some prospects don't pan out, and it's sad for Rawlson. The one, and you mentioned the one that I was most disappointed and upset about not paying out. That was David Dahl. He had a lot of potential, and he showed it in 2019 when I believe he finished with a 319 average that year, and he made the All Star team.
Hmm.
Um, he just he had too many leg injuries, and it's really betrayed him. And he was the first round pick in 2012, and
Mm.
out of was it Birmingham, Alabama? That's right. And yeah, and so he was with San Diego this year. He only played 4 games. Yeah, he could end up now being a guy who's a 4A player when he could have been a staple for the Rockies for seasons to come. But and like I've mentioned on the podcast where we had Louis on there, at what point do you cut your losses and move on and do what's best for the player and what's best for the club, and ultimately what's best for the club, because you can only give a guy so many chances regardless of how talented he is. And that's what the decision they made with Dahl, and that's the decision they got to make with Rogers. I think if he can't
Mhm.
stay on the field, and it's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just
Oh,
gonna mention.
sorry. One more
Yeah.
thing.
Oh, go
Noah
ahead.
Syndergaard. Noah Syndergaard was DFA on August 30th by the Cleveland Guardians.
Okay. Yeah, I was just gonna say because it kind of reminded me of Jonathan Daza because like nobody
Ah,
really talked
yes.
about him after he left the Rockies, and I feel bad for Daza, but clearly Brent Doyle is. I know offensively there's questions there, but easily Doyle beats Daza by a mile for sure, and Daza
Yeah, for
really
sure.
didn't. At the start of the season, Daza didn't actually do very well defensively. I remember that first series in San Diego, he could have made a couple of those plays, but he just misread the ball. Where Doyle, he never really did that this year, and so it's sad for Daza because I know he got injured in AAA and had to finish the season on. I think the Rockies, he'll probably be a AAA player, but I could see the Rockies trading him. But he's, again, it's kind of like Garrett Hampson last year. The Rockies really didn't trade him; they just non-tendered him, and I think that's they could keep Daza. I wouldn't be surprised if they would, just in case Doyle gets injured. Hopefully that doesn't happen. I pray that doesn't happen. But Doyle, he's their guy, and I think if you're the Rockies, you know you either trade Daza or you just, to keep room because again, like I think Lewis mentioned this last week. I think the Rule 5 draft is coming up, in a couple months, and they're basically going to have to make some cuts on the roster because you got to save, room for, Fernandez and Amador. And if you want to save an outfield spot, I think I want to say you have to cut guys off your 40-man roster, I believe. And if
Mhm.
Daza is still on that 40-man roster, you have to cut him. You have to get rid of him because Daza is not a part of the future. It's been fun while he's been here. And I know some people are upset that when the Rockies, DFA'd him back in April, but now people are like, "Oh, yay, Doyle's here." So, you feel bad whenever a player gets cut because that's his job. He kind of loses a big league job, but hopefully Daza can find another place to play. And for instance, Gary Hampson, I was kind of sad that the Rockies got rid of him and they non-tendered him, but he found a job in Miami basically immediately, and he was able to get back in the playoffs. He was able to help that Miami Marlins team get back to the postseason. So, you know, maybe Daza can help a team, get help their offense because I know Daza he had some good moments where he got on base. I think Daza was pretty good getting on base. He's not going to give you hardly any home runs, but I think he could help a team, and see that's what the Rockies need to do here is just like you said, cut their losses, and because you got to make room for some of the guys coming up, and guys like Brendan Rodgers or the Rockies, they're not going to trade McMahon because I don't think there's any third basemen in the minor leagues that are kind of ready. I mean, Sterling Thompson I think is a third baseman, but
Mhm.
I think Sterling Thompson is going to be more of a utility player, outfielder, maybe some third base occasionally or first base, but um, I was thinking maybe even catcher. Elias Diaz, he has 1 year left on his contract, but I feel like Elias Diaz after his All-Star season, the Rockies they're not going to trade him. They're not going to because it's just like you don't really do that. I mean, they could, and there's a part of me that feels like not Daza, Diaz is going to have a regression. This upcoming season, 2024, but you. If Diaz doesn't have a good season, you know what? It's not the end of the world. I mean, you have Romo that's going to be the future catcher, at least, starting in 2025, hopefully. And so, that's what you can do. And I mean, if you want to trade Diaz, if Diaz is, again, off to a hot start, in 2024, you could trade him at the deadline or even before the trade deadline. You can make a trade and have Romo start, being the starting catcher and for the rest of 2024 and maybe 2025, you make a push for the postseason.
No, yeah. I mean, I guess I think you're right in regards to certain when it comes to the timing aspect. I think the timing could be perfect at the catcher position for Elias Diaz because when he becomes a free agent, I think the likelihood of them bringing him back is very small. And if Drew Romo is, again, going back to your earlier point, I don't think he's going to be up this season. Because I would let him spend the full year in AAA Albuquerque, let him get a full season's worth of at bats down there in AAA, and then if maybe he could be a September call up to find if you need extra catching help. Maybe of course you want if Austin wins as the backup, you want to have that third catcher on the roster just for rest sake or just limiting because it's the dog days. But I think if Drew Romo is ready at the end of the season, and there's no doubt in Bill Schmidt's mind, he's ready to take over. He should then take over for 2025, because when you promote him to a full-time capacity spot on the roster, he's not someone you bring up to sit and be the backup. He will play or be he will do a full-time load of catching starts, which is not every day, but yeah, he will be the full-time catcher.
By the way, the Rangers, they just tied the game. Corey Seager got a home run.
It's ironic that the Diamondbacks get stung by their former division foe, Corey Seager, former Dodgers shortstop and World Series MVP 2020, by the way, too.
They hate that guy. I tell you, they probably hate that guy. They're probably tired of him. And I mean, Corey Seager, I mean, he's had a great postseason, and the inning is now in the top of the 10th inning. So for all of us to go watch it, I think we're going to wrap up this podcast. But I think I'm trying to think if there's anything else we can talk about. I think with the I guess we'll talk about it very shortly. Just kind of like a memory lane kind of thing, since we're coming up on Halloween. Tom and I decided we want to quickly, just quickly share our thoughts for just a couple minutes about like what was our spookiest moment or scariest moment in at least in recent memory for the Rockies. And I think we both agreed that it was the 2018 National League wildcard game. This is something that we've been talking about. Of course, once we kind of get more stuff to our video podcast, and we'll be able to live stream that and potentially connect that to our YouTube channel and for you guys to watch. But like I'll never forget that game. And of course, I'm sure I remember I was in high school. I was coming back I believe it was soccer practice. Yeah, it was soccer practice. And I remember just having the conversation in the car while my, parents were in the store. And I was like, yeah, this is it. If we don't win here against the Cubs, the season's over, and it's going to be kind of like a massive disappointment. And well, anyway, we go in the wild card game and we score first. That was great, and I was like, okay, that's great. A lot better than what happened a year ago in Arizona. And then all of a sudden, God Freeland pitches a beautiful game, as we all know. We go to the eighth inning. Rockies bring in Adam Ottavino, who was I believe he was nearly an all-star that year. I think he was in the conversation of being an all-star. He should have been an all-star. And he came in, Terrence Gore, I don't know. I think they pinch ran him because I think somebody else got him. I think it was Rizzo. Rizzo got on base, and they replaced him with Terrence Gore, who is a speed devil, and he's been everywhere, I feel like, in Major League Baseball. And that's all Terrence Gore could not hit a lick off a baseball. The best thing he could do is run, but that's how good he was. And so he goes to second base. I think he steals a base, and then
Mhm.
Baez comes up, who it's hard to believe that Javier Baez was an NL MVP candidate that year. That's how good he was. And it's funny to see the highlights of how bad he is now. But he gets a base hit into center field, and the crowd goes nuts. And when that happened, I just hanged my head. I'm like, yeah, it's over, because they're going to have Brian come up, or at least Daniel Murphy, who was then a Cub. I'm like, yeah, this game's over. It's just like when this stuff happens in the playoffs, the crowd is on the other team's side. It's basically almost over. And not to mention the winning one, the go ahead run was at second base, which was Baez, who had good speed. And I'm like, yeah. And I think I think there was two outs, but I was like, yeah, this game might be over. Even if it goes into extras, I have a feeling that, the Cubs are probably going to get a hit a walk-off home run or something like that. And I'm like, this is like, that was probably, it's still to this day, I guarantee you that was probably the most stressful, most scariest game in my Rockies life, because it's just like, this is it. Like, this is a playoff in many ways. And I can still say this to people to this day. In many ways, it felt like a World Series game, even though we weren't playing an American League. It felt like a World Series game because it was just the intensity of it. And then we go to extra innings, 1-1, and I'm like, okay, this is insane. And I'm like, like I remember just my heart rate was above 150. I was like choking up. I'm like, man, we got to do something here. We got to score here. But the Rockies offense just didn't show up. And I'm like, man, this is, oh man. And not to mention, the Rockies, they had some good arms in that bullpen, but still, like, they had some young, players kind of like the D-backs have this year. And it just like, I wasn't super like, ooh, I really like this pitcher. It was just like, man, I have a feeling that the Cubs are going to do something here. Not to mention they're probably a little bit pissed after they lost the previous game against the Brewers for the National League Central title. So I was like, yeah, they're probably going to win. And when it kept going, the further game got, the more tense I got, the more afraid I got because it was like, man, will this game ever end? And then it got to the point of like, I think it was the top of the 13th inning. I was like, hey, we have a, if we can get a couple base hits here, we can try to do something. And I remember uh, Story got on first, and then Parra came up. He got a base hit, and then I was not very happy that Tony Walters was being subbed in as the pinch hit. I'm like, oh great, this guy's hitting under 200 this year. This is just unbelievable. Like, what is Bo Black doing? And then I think it was a 2-2 or 3-2 pitch. Tony Walters, of all people, gets a base hit up the center field, and the Rockies take the lead 2-1. I'm like, I was freaking out. Me and my brother, we were jumping up in the living room, like in the living room. We were so excited. But then there was a question, okay, are we gonna blow it in the bottom of the inning? And of course that didn't happen. But man, that was like, it was scary because it was like, man, like because the Rockies, they haven't made the playoffs since. Well, of course, they made the playoffs the year before, but ever since that, they didn't make the playoffs for at least nearly a decade since 2009. And for a team to lose both times in the wild card game, that's not a very good look. Yeah, I mean, it's great to make the playoffs, but I have never been so nervous and more scared in my entire life than the 2018 wild card game. It just the emotions were high in that game. The Cubs felt like they were going to win that game. The Rockies were, they had some guys that had been there before, but I feel like the Rockies were like, nope, we're going to, surprise some people. And they did that. And it was large in part because of the pitching. And that was the thing that concerned me the most, not the offense. It was the pitching. And they came through in that game. And I think that was probably one of the most, yeah, that's probably the most scariest moment in my life as a Rockies fan.
Well, the scariest moment for me was a specific moment in that game. That game was on the edge of my seat. I was going into the game, I wasn't as scared or nervous, I suppose, because I knew with the fact we had our ace on the mound, Kyle Freeland, that year, we had it gave us a chance. I think, in my opinion, more pressure was on the Cubs because they were trying to continue and extend their winning window. And then after, I think, in my opinion, that was the year of the Cubs' so-called contention window of that core group of Baez, Rizzo, Bryant, etc., Contreras, etc. And then, of course, a few short years later, they started dismantling that team. And as a friend of mine who is a diehard Cub fan said, he said we should have rebuilt, we should have kind of not maybe rebuilt, but reconstructed that roster, made some serious reconstructing that roster after that season. And of course, Theo didn't do that, and well, the rest is history. But I digress. The scariest moment for me in that game was when ball shot. I can't remember life me. I'm trying to find. I can't remember the inning, but a shot fly ball is hit out to right field. I think it was the fourth or fifth inning, and David Dahl comes in, he overshoots it,
Oh
and
yeah,
it
yeah.
just drops. I thought, oh, I remember I was on the couch of my old apartment. I went, oh my god, what? I was just in such because Dahl is not a Gold Glove caliber fielder,
No.
but
Yeah.
he was a capable fielder. And he just overshot the fly ball. I guess maybe he lost it in the lights or something, and then
Mhm.
because it wasn't the wall, because he was about 15, 20 feet away from the wall, so that wasn't going to be a concern, even though over there in that area, the bullpen was right not too far from where he was. But that just was my scariest moment as a Rocky fan, where I was literally just in shock and just crazy because I was nervous because a play like that of that magnitude in a
Mhm.
game like that can really change the course of a game and just flip it on its side and do. And thankfully, I think it was the very next batter, the inning still ended, so it was so
Mhm.
okay. So that's when my heart rate slowed down. I thought, "Whew, no damage done. We're still good. We're good. We're still good." So to
Yeah.
me, that was the scare. That was to me, to my recollection, that is the scariest
Mhm.
moment or spookiest moment you could say in my history as a Rockies fan.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of funny because there was actually several plays in right field that happened that night. I think it was later in the game when there was a pop fly to right field. I think it was Bryant who pop fly to right. It was Cargo in right field. DJ was going out, and
Yes.
DJ basically had to do this kind of like the same thing Dahl did,
Ah.
except. And I'm like, oh, like Cargo, you got to make that catch because really it was in Cargo's area, and DJ. I don't know. I still to this day I don't know how in the world he caught that ball with the
uh,
wind over the back, and I think he won a Gold Glove by the way that year. But like, yeah,
multiple time Gold Glove winner.
yeah, and so I'm like, how in the like, what is going on here? Like, the communication must be terrible. I'm sure there was probably a lot of crowd noise. I mean, the Wrigley is my goodness in the postseason is so loud, like any ballpark. But Wrigley, it's different in the postseason. But I'm like, come on, Cargo, you got to make that catch. And then
Mm.
I think, oh yeah, and then oh yeah, it was first and second. I want to believe, yeah, it was like
Uh-huh.
first and second, and It was the same. I think it was the same inning. No, it was the inning before. It was the inning that Kyle Freeland got out, and they subbed in Ottavino. And first and second, Ottavino pitches to Jason Hayward, and the catcher that came in for Chris Iannetta, which was wasn't
Drew Butera.
yep. And you probably know what I'm talking about. He throws the pitch,
Yep.
ground ball to first base to Ian Desmond,
Mhm.
throws first, and then all of a sudden, umpire says catcher's
Catcher's in
interference. I'm
it.
like,
Yep.
I'm like,
I was I didn't see I remember thinking back to that play. I didn't remember, and it was kind of funny where we had 3 catchers on the roster for that game, and, Walters, Butera, and Iannetta, who old friend Iannetta, who started the game. But I remember that play. That was actually one where I thought that also Turner, and I thought, "Wait, did it really hit him?" Because I didn't see his I remember thinking I didn't see his glove fly out, but then
yeah,
again, you look at the
yeah.
replay, it hit the flap, it hit the top flap of the glove, so
And you see, and I think in the replay, you could see Bertier's like, "Man, I think I just blew this game." And like, and Ottavino, and I get a props to Ottavino for like actually, and then he struck out Hayward, which was huge. And
Mhm.
base, I mean, you're talking bases. I think it was bases loaded, or at least first and second. If Hayward gets a base hit, that's you tie the game, and then not to mention next inning, you could have seen a 2-1 game here into where the Cubs would win. There were so many moments like that where the Cubs could have taken the lead, and I think it was in the extra innings. I want to say it was like the 11th or 12th inning. The Cubs had like runners at first and second, or either bases loaded, and Murphy grounded out to Desmond at first base. I'm like, oh, there was so many good moments, but also it was just so scary because it's just like, man, like you're on, like you said, on the edge of your seat, your heart rate's going a mile a minute, and I'm not gonna lie, like, there were like, in my house, at least, there was a lot of tension, like, we weren't, like, yelling, but we were like, "Everyone calm down," like, we were like, it was that's how it felt, and so, it was so I mean, I've never witnessed a game like that. Now, of course, I don't really remember I do remember a little bit watching 2007, but that was a completely different series and otherwise, but 2017, that wasn't really scary because, the game was basically over after it started, and unfortunately, the way it went, it was all D-backs. But yeah, no question, 2018, that will be a year to especially that game. It was one of the most scariest moments, but I think it's one of the best games in Rockies history, easily
Mhm.
by far,
Mhm.
because you're taking a look at a team that had just won the World Series 2 years prior, and the Rockies go in there and they absolutely outpitched them, and they stole a game from the Cubs, and the Cubs to this day they haven't really been the same since that game, and and that's a big reason why they had to dismantle a couple years later from those big players, and that was like you said, that was kind of like their last window. Of course, they made the playoffs in the shortened season, but really, I really don't like to count that season for many reasons. But anyways, yeah, that year in that game, oh my goodness, that like I probably have not I probably that's probably the closest I've ever been getting close to a heart attack. I mean, it was just so insane. It was amazing game, and of course, eventually we'd like to, do a reaction video kind of, or do a re-reaction per se on our YouTube channel. It's hopefully soon because we're kind of shifting in between different platforms here. But anyways, folks, I think that will do it for tonight's podcast. Again, we're gonna have to keep an eye on the World Series because I think it's an extra. I think it's still in extra innings right now.
If it's a bottom of the 10th, 5-5.
Oh boy, yeah, I got to see the ending here. So, anyways, folks, I think we're gonna let you all go. We appreciate you for listening into tonight's edition of the Rockies Now podcast. Uh, please feel free to rate us. Feel free to subscribe and follow us on all of your favorite social media platforms. That'll do it for tonight's podcast. Thank you so much, and as always, go Rockies.